When it comes to public speaking tips, there are a lot of obvious points that you would already know of, such as we should have good body language and good posture. We should maintain eye contact with the audience. And we should come across as very, very confident. So we're not going to discuss those points over here. Instead, we're going to try and cover some points that we feel aren't spoken about very often to help you improve your public speaking. Hey, my name is Radeep, and I love learning about effective communications and sharing those learnings with you so that you can level up your communications game as well. The very first point is to shift our focus. What I mean by this is that when we go on stage, the reason why most of us get very, very nervous is because we are only thinking about ourselves. Are we coming across as confident? What will happen if we mess up on stage? What if the audience laughs at us and it's all me, me, me? When in reality, public speaking is just about asking one simple question to ourselves, which is, what can I say or do that will provide maximum value to my audience? And when we shift that focus from ourselves onto our listeners, that's when we stop caring too much about things like body language and eye contact, and we start focusing more on saying things in a manner that our audience will actually get value from. Tip number 2, the power of rhetoric. There are quite a few rhetoric devices, and I'm not going to get into each of them. We've made an entire video on rhetoric devices, which you can check out, link in the description below. But the point is that if we can make ourselves familiar with rhetorical devices, the better we'll be at communicating. For example, one very basic rhetorical device is something called an analogy, which you already might be familiar with. It means explaining something with something else to make a particular point. For instance, from the movie Forrest Gump, the very famous dialogue, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. And knowing different rhetorical devices and sprinkling it within a speech will make it so much better than one which does not have these devices. The third point is to have a strong opening and a strong closing. We've discussed these two topics a lot within this channel, but the point of an opening is to make sure that we are making the audience curious so that they stick around for the rest of our speech. Here's an example from one of my favorite TED Talks, Dan Pink. Look how he opens his speech and immediately grips the audience's attention.
I need to make a confession at the outset here. A little over 20 years ago, I did something that I regret, something that I'm not particularly proud of, something that in many ways I wish no one would ever know, but that here I feel kind of obliged to reveal.
And the point of a strong closing is to make sure that we're leaving the audience with something to ponder over, or we're ending on a high note. Here's another example from a TED Talk.
If we love such moments ferociously, then maybe we can learn to live well, not in spite of death, but because of it. Let death be what takes us, not lack of imagination. Thank you.
Next tip is to put ourselves on the same level as the audience. What I mean by this is that sometimes, as speakers, when we're on stage, there's a certain disconnect between us and the audience because we're always physically elevated. But some speakers can work the room extremely well when they get off stage and really get into the crowd and start mingling with them while continuing with their speech. And if we can do that at some points in our speech, get off the stage, be at the same physical level as our audience, it'll help make us more relatable and engaging as speakers. Tip number 5 is to use something called inflection. This means using our voice to convey a particular emotion. If I were to speak like this throughout the whole video with this expression and this tonality, you probably would not feel like I like this topic very much. But if I bring in some sort of energy and enthusiasm to my voice because I genuinely like speaking about whatever it is I'm telling you, you're much more likely to be engaged by whatever it is that I'm saying. And that's the point of inflection, that no matter what sentence we are saying, if we add an emotion behind it, it becomes that much more powerful. So instead of just saying, this was the worst day of my life, if we can say, this was the worst day of my life, it just changes the entire vibe. Next point is to move with purpose. We've always seen speakers who are moving about on stage like they are a caged panther of some sorts, and we should make sure that we're only moving when we have a certain point to make. For instance, we do part of our speech from this side of the stage, the next part from the other side of the stage, and maybe the last part from the center. This will help us use the stage a lot more effectively and not distract the audience by just moving around all the time. Next point is to contrast our energies. If we see a speaker who is very stiff and just talking very slowly and in a low tone of voice, or if we see a speaker who's very, very enthusiastic all the time, at some point or the other, either of these speakers will lose their audience. But on the other hand, if we have a speaker who at some points goes a little slowly, a little softly, and at other points, he or she really goes with energy, that is much more engaging to the audience because we're contrasting the way we're delivering our talk. Jordan Peterson does this really well. At some points in his speech, he goes really soft, and at some points he goes really energetic and really interacts with the crowd. And by doing this, we jolt the audience back into attention because we're not maintaining the same monotonous tone. The next point is something called functional gesturing. One of the most common questions we get asked by the people that we coach is that, what do I do with my hands when I'm on stage? Should I keep them in my pocket? Should I fold them? I don't know how to move and use my hands effectively. And I have the opposite problem. I tend to use my hands way too excessively. But in reality, functional gesturing means that we only use our hands when it complements something that we're saying with our words. The neutral stance that I like to keep is to keep my hands like this and put it a little below my belly and only bring them up when I have something to say. So for instance, if I'm talking about rises or falls, that's when I'll use my hands. Or when I'm talking about going forward or backwards, or if I want to emphasize on something, I'll do something like this. And that just simplifies gesturing. The second last tip is something called redirection tools. This means having things within our speech or presentation that takes the attention away from us while still moving our point forward. For instance, having a video playing to complement our speech, or calling the audience on stage, or doing an activity with them. All these things take away the focus from us and they break the monotony of the audience just seeing one speaker. So adding different tools like these adds an additional engagement element within a speech. And the last point, which is very basic but not spoken about very often, is to arrive early. Wherever we might be giving a particular talk, if we just can arrive a little early, walk around on the stage before the event even begins to get used to that environment, greet the audience, interact with them, so that when we do go on stage, we're a lot more calmer and a lot more grounded, as opposed to just reaching the stage directly and starting off very frantically. And that's about it. 10 tips that will help you improve your public speaking. If you have any more questions around things like public speaking or communications, we have an entire website with in-depth articles and resources dedicated just for that. So go check out franticallyspeaking.com. And if you have your very first speech to give and are extremely, extremely nervous about it, we've created an entire video with very, very practical steps that will help us not appear very nervous, which you can check out right here.